Welcome to TrustBuilders, the podcast where we have transformative conversations with company leaders as well as sales and marketing managers about growing your business by educating your customers and building trust. My name is Hannah Eisenberg and I am your host. Hey Chris, thank you so much for joining me as my first guest on TrustBuilders. Super stoked because you were the people who got me started on this journey. So I am super thrilled that you're here. I'd love to let you introduce yourself a little bit and get us started like that.
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, so we met through our They Ask You Answer coaching program at Impact, right? Which was, I don't know, must be at least a year now, right? It's got to be about that, about a year ago. And I think from a background perspective, probably a couple of big things for the audience to know is, I'd say this is like a 10-year career path at the moment for me, meeting Marcus Sheridan about 2013, 2014, and then working closely with Marcus Sheridan, the author of They Ask You Answer. Things really grew from there. Like, first of all, understanding They Ask You Answer, working with some clients here in the UK really early on, one of them being a manufacturing construction company here in the UK. And then over about 4 or 5 years, teaching many small businesses across the whole world through a sort of membership, live event type, teaching, facilitating type business that I had here in the UK. And then about 5 years ago, transitioned from my working in my own business and teaching small businesses to getting into a sort of more fast-paced agency life, where Marcus asked me to come and work for his company and work with larger companies, and really grew They Ask You Answer from that point. They Ask You Answer, I think, really started as a sort of marketing things that marketers did. And I would say about halfway in this 10-year window, about 5 years ago, it became very clear that this needed to be quite a sales-driven initiative. And so things have really grown over the years as They Ask You Answer has been adopted across the world, from marketing and into sales and into leadership. And then finally, really in the last couple of years, into something that we felt like we had a somewhat repeatable model that we were able to then teach to people like yourself, Hannah, all over the world. So we can go into like non-English speaking countries and have coaches like yourself being able to deliver a They Ask You Answer, a They Ask You Answer coaching program or consulting program to other businesses in other parts of the world that perhaps Impact, the company that I work for, can't reach, right? And would never reach perhaps. And so this They Ask You Answer snowball kind of just seems to be growing and growing and growing all the time. And perhaps, like, for the audience as well, the one thing that's really special about They Ask You Answer, I find, is that it just never seems to go out of date. In fact, it seems the book sells more every year on year, and that's reasonably unique and unusual for a marketing and sales book, which tend to go out of date pretty quickly in this world. So I think that's a special thing, and part of that's really because it's based on principles of like how people want to be informed as buyers to make good decisions, and they want to feel confident about the buying decisions they're making. And so They Ask You Answer, until there's a day where like that's not true for somebody, that when they're making a buying decision they want to feel informed and confident, then They Ask You Answer will be relevant until that point, I think. And so I love that about They Ask You Answer. In fact, I would say that was the hook for me 10 years ago, was listening to Marcus and saying, that's the kind of marketing person I want to be. I want to be the type of person that's creating content that really builds trust and confidence with people. And I really got hooked in at that point. And so that's really where I would say the last 10 years is probably the most relevant part of my career to share with everybody here. But that's a snapshot, I would say, Hannah.
Yeah, you also wrote a book, and I want to get to that in a little bit. The book is called Become an Authoritative Coach. And I would love to pick a few lessons from that book later on. But what you just said with They Ask You Answer and trust and confidence, I want to just pull that thread a little bit
Hmm.
And, a lot of people might not know what the Ask You Answer really is because there's a bunch of misconceptions. You said a lot of times it's seen just as a marketing initiative, then
Right.
sort of sales gets involved. But if you're actually implementing it, it becomes this complete transition or transformation a whole organization has to go through. Can you just take us a little bit on that journey of what that looks like?
Yeah, you're right. It did start off as something that marketers really got hook in. I think that's mainly because Marcus was so tapped into the HubSpot community. So like
Mhm.
HubSpotters were in there, mostly marketers, and those were the people that really took to it quickly. But what we realized, I think there's a couple of big things, right? Well, what we realized is that a lot of companies were being successful with the Ask You Answer in terms of like getting more traffic, more leads, more sales, right? But it's very much like there was a glass ceiling on that because it was all happening through marketing, and the sales department, well, for didn't even had no idea what was going on. All they knew was that they were getting better customers, perhaps, or whatever. But what we realized was in order to really get the most from what we were teaching companies, and we had to get the sales team involved from the very start. And it wasn't just a
Mhm.
glass ceiling; it was realizing that actually we were hitting walls. We're like we wanted people were like we want to do more. We want to get better results, but we're hitting this wall, which is tapping into the sales team. And so what we did was we quickly realized. I'd say quickly it took a while to realize that actually what needed to happen was a sales team needed to become a driver for this. They need to come in right at the front end of this. And so and this is all learning, right? You start to when you start to work with bigger companies, you start to learn more about how to roll out a program like this in a company. And so the first thing was how do we get sales in from the very start? And so we started to think about how we sell the program, and that there's a sales leader always present, and there's the marketing leaders present, but also that
Mhm.
the leader of the company, the organization, the owner, the principal, was heavily involved, even if they weren't going to be involved in the program, heavily involved from the beginning in terms of supporting it and a vote for it, and ultimately signing the check on paying for it as well. So we realized that if we want to create true transformational change within an organization in terms of really adopting a new way of thinking about, it's not just a way of thinking, it's new actions, there's new behaviors, there's the sort of better idea of what outcomes and success looks like as well. If we want to roll this out in a company and create that type of transformation, then there's key stakeholders and individuals that need to be involved in that beyond the marketing department. The marketing department might be a catalyst for it, they might own it, but ultimately there needs to be these other key stakeholders for it to really truly make a difference within an organization. For me personally, as a coach, as a They Ask You Answer coach, I want to feel like if we stop working together, if I stop working together with a client, that I feel really confident that it's going to stick. And
Mhm.
you can't, it's not going to, the more people that are involved in that, then the more sticky it becomes.
Yeah.
So, it's not just, I think the transformational piece is interesting because when we say like transformational change, people are like, well, we just want more traffic, leads, and sales. Why does it need to be so transformational? And the transformational piece, I think, is many things, but I think the key part is understanding that if there's a silo between sales and marketing, then you're going to hit walls, you're going to have a glass ceiling. And so breaking down silos becomes a big part of it. And perhaps the bigger piece is moving and shifting from thinking that you should be outsourcing your marketing and your marketing and digital marketing to agency, and actually bringing it in house and hiring people like a writer or a content manager, hiring a videographer, doing these things that perhaps other people in your industry aren't doing, and it doesn't seem like normal. That's transformational change,
Mhm.
doing something that's not the norm and seems a bit weird perhaps until you truly understand what it is that we're actually trying to do.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, but when I joined your coaching program, you asked me, one of the first questions you asked me was, what are you hoping to get out of this?
Mm,
What's the end goal for you?
right.
And for me, it was, Chris, I want you to give me a curriculum because I was struggling. I was doing the marketing for my clients. I was trying to do the sales enablement for my clients, but I couldn't replicate that enough and I couldn't make it scalable for my business to
Mm,
have multiple clients, where I do the same thing because I couldn't figure out how to clone myself.
Right.
Now, when I came into the coaching program, what I wanted to get out of it was give me something I can transfer to my clients, right? Here's lesson 1, 2, 3, 4. And it took another month for me to really like realize the light
Mm.
bulbs went on. And I was like, oh my God, it's all about communication.
Mm.
It's all about how we change our attitude, how we are communicating with people, and how we're instilling trust. And I would love for you to just share maybe some thoughts around how people who are wanting to do they ask you answer or want to get more deals by
Mm-hmm.
becoming that voice of trust.
Mm-hmm.
How, first of all, what that attitude shift needs to look like and how that impacts your communication that you have with your customers. It's like that shift of thinking that has to happen.
Yeah, it is a shift of thinking. I'll try. I'll try my best to articulate it. I think the best place for me to start is like what I'm familiar with. The best companies I've worked with, the ones that already get it. Like they wouldn't be able to tell you it was they ask you answer. They wouldn't be able to tell you that they were following a framework, but they're already doing it culturally.
Mm-hmm.
Is where they know their product is really good, right? They don't have to pull the wool over people's eyes to get them to buy the thing, right? They're already confident about what they do. They've got a product that is actually really great, and they don't have to pretend, right? They already are quite honest and open with their customers, which obviously builds trust and confidence with the buyers. So I think that's a good place for a coach like you or me to work with, is with a company that already culturally seems to be doing some of the right sort of like it's embedded in them, right? I think the challenge comes when it comes with a company where they sort of don't get it because they're like, we just want to make money. There's no real cause. There's not something bigger than that. So I think I struggle with that sometimes. But the ones like I'll try and paint a clearer picture. I've got a client in my mind right now where the things that they said to me early on was things like, we trust our customer. And I was like, well, what do you mean? That's quite a powerful statement. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, look, they're going to buy the one that they feel most confident about buying. I can't
Yeah.
make them buy it, but I can help them to feel more educated as they buy the thing. So whether they go to my competitors or whether they buy the cheapest version of this in the marketplace, it's really not I can't put a gun to their head and make them do it. But what I can do is involve myself and my brand and my content in the conversation as they make their buying decision. So even like there's just this honestness about a sophisticated owner of a business that understands that their buyers are looking at their competitors. They are trying to figure stuff out. There's things that they don't know that's stopping them from buying. And that if I can educate them and get myself involved in that conversation, they're more likely to feel confident about making a decision, whether they buy or not. So I think when I think about the best customers, the best clients I've ever worked with, that's how they think. They think about, how do I help someone like a Hannah that's trying to buy this thing feel like I give them access to everything that they need, address their questions, try and see the world from their perspective, and trust them that if I give them all the right information, they will make the best decision for themselves. And sometimes that'll be buying from my brand, and sometimes it won't, which is the reality today as it is anyway, right? It's still a reality. And so I think a lot of sophisticated business owners who really understand that are the ones that are going to run with it. They're going to get there faster. There's going to be less pushback, less resistance, and ultimately understand how to build trust in a marketplace, which is a long term investment in content and like you said, like what you're putting out into the world, the way you communicate with your buyer is you've got to stay. It's like I think about companies that I worked with 10 years ago that are still doing it today. They're like, this is just the way we do it. This is how we
Yeah.
communicate. And they're known for it now. They're like, look, if you want to know something, you want an honest response, you want the information, and you want it in an honest and unbiased way, then go to this brand for that information. Everybody else is just trying to make a quick sale, trying to survive. This company here are invested in this for the long term, and they know that every article and every video that they put out is like as like they're putting a credit in their bank account of trust for the future. And so I think when I think about a company and I think about building trust, and a lot of companies wouldn't say that. They wouldn't be like, "Hey Hannah, can you show us how to build trust in the marketplace?" They wouldn't say that, but they
Mm.
would say we need to help our buyers understand better what it is that they're buying. And so there's several other things they might say, but ultimately they're trying to help people make better choices, the right choices for them. And ultimately that's where we want to leave it with the ask you answer and say, it's up to you. Here's the facts, here's the information, here's what you should be thinking about. And to me that's a very trusting way to build a business and build a brand.
It's very powerful. It's like very freeing once you've come to that realization that you're educating and it's up to them to make the decision. You stop chasing and you start educating. It's all about communication. Once we have gotten to that point, we want to be that trusted voice in the space. How does that change how people communicate with their buyers then?
Yeah, I think something simple would be like, this might not be a good fit for you. You
Yeah.
know, it's like that's an example. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me is like starting off with that, and a customer would be like, "Well, you're not just going to flat out try and sell to me right now." And like, actually, this might not be a good fit for you, and here's why. And that is a good example of the language change, the positioning
Hmm.
change, is immediately disarm somebody and stop, and they're like, "Well, okay, that's interesting. You're not going to try, so you're not going to try and sell to me right now. You're going to try and help me make a better decision," and they get a sense that you're going to truly help them rather than sell to them. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind in terms of a language change, is that this might not be a good fit for you. And then I think you've got to think like to the brand, or the person, the brand, the company that's doing this work. They just believe in, you know, making sure that their product or their service is actually sold to the right people.
Yeah.
There's, a company that's trying to just sell as much as possible wouldn't think like this perhaps, but the ones that are like, actually it's more important that we sell to the right people and we get good fits, because that leads to repeat business and referrals and good reviews and all that good stuff. And they just see they just see the bigger picture, right? They just see the many steps ahead. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, Hannah. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, but that would be the first sort of language change, sort of mindset change that leads to a language change or a communication change.
Yeah, that's a really good example of a soundbite change in attitude, which kind of leads me to your book. One of the key lessons or one of the things that stood out to me when I read the book for the first time was your thoughts on stop being a people pleaser and switch towards respect. So that balance of letting go of being liked and going for respect. I
Mm.
would love for you to share your thoughts because that is, I don't know, a lot of times I hear little Chris saying on my shoulder, people pleasing versus respect.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you've made that connection there. I think because it's kind of the same thing whether they're doing when a company's doing they ask you answer or not. It's like there's not a desperation to sell the thing, and that's about self-respect, right? So we and come back to one of the earlier points I made, which was like about believing in your brand, right, and then believing in getting the right customers, and that's sort of, I think the key dynamic here is like what's coming from within and how are you being pulled by external things. So the need to be liked comes from external things, people, culture, social norms, that sort of thing. We're pulled by these things, but the need, if you want to reduce your need to be liked, it really comes from building up your self-respect. And so these things can't these things have like an inverse relationship, right? If you want to If you want to reduce your need to be liked, you need to build your self-respect. So that comes from within you, right? So that's the big piece of work that needs to happen for most people. But yeah, you can either be a people pleaser, or the way I look at it is like you can either be a people pleaser or an empowering peer, but you can't be both, right? And what I mean by that is like there is essentially a spectrum to go from people pleasing, which is that desperation, I'll do anything that you need me to do to get the thing that we need to do. But what actually happens is that, and this comes back to that whole soundbite of like this might not be a good fit for you, is it's sort of like a challenging phrase, but a lot of people think that it pushes people away, but actually what happens is it draws them in. And this is the inverse relationship about people pleasing, is that people are people pleasers because they want people to like them, and they want, they do anything to get to the outcome what it is. But what happens is it just pushes them away. It just pushes them away.
Mm.
Whereas this inverse relationship comes in, it's like, actually, if I reduce the need to be like, I can move from people pleaser to like peer status and empower people, then actually it draws them in. And so it's hard for people to go to that place, I think, to move across that spectrum.
Mhm.
But ultimately that is what it's all about. And what actually happens is that we find that people start to have, if they can get away from this need to be liked, they actually start to have much better, deeper, more meaningful relationships with people in their lives, not just clients, but people across their whole life. Because, they aren't willing to just bend over for things, and they have boundaries and they have standards, and they have self-respect. If you just think about anybody that you know in your life that you respect, usually it's because they've got a certain way about them, they've got a certain characteristics, and you just know who you are with them. Like, they don't change their personality based on who they are. They're very straightforward, they're honest. Like, there's always, like, for everybody that's listening as well, it's like everybody probably knows somebody in their life that if they wanted the truth, right, you would go to that person. And that's really what we're talking about. Is like, could you be that person for other people, that you can tell the truth, you can be honest and straightforward without it becoming about you and your emotional difficulty around all of that. So I
Yeah.
think about this spectrum between like need to be liked and how and where your self-respect is, and then you're sort of moving along this spectrum from people pleaser to this empowering peer, where no matter who you're speaking to, you can carry yourself and you feel like you're always at a peer level with people. And I think that's a healthy relationship to have with most people, whether you're a brand and we're talking about clients, or it's between you and I, whatever that might be. So that's like in a nutshell what it's really all about.
Yeah. And it always needs to come from a genuine place, right? You can learn those communication principles and you can learn those sound bites. But if you're just using the phrase, we might not be a good fit, and you're trying to manipulate
Right.
people into that, oh, into that reaction essentially, then it's going to come across in a very different way, as if you genuinely believe
Right.
we might not be a good fit. And
Yeah.
that is very, very close to another communication principle I learned from you, which honestly completely changed my life. And that's radical candor.
Hmm.
And I love teaching this to people, because when you see the light bulbs go on and they are going through past conversations of where they were maybe using something to manipulate, or they were being quiet to
Hmm.
get a certain, because they were trying to spare someone's feelings, you know so sorry, I'm not trying to give the whole thing away, but can you give some tips maybe around that, what it means to be radically candid, and why that is something that we have to have as
Yeah.
a salesperson in order to get trust?
Yeah, there's two things that come to mind here, which is, of course, it doesn't go without saying. I was going to say it does go without saying, but it doesn't. You have to stay at this. It's like they've got to use all of this stuff for good, right? And there are
Yeah.
certain people that won't. They'll use all these tips and techniques to manipulate people and get their way. And those are the sort of sociopathic, narcissistic people that sit in that category. Fortunately, it's not everybody, right? Most people are good people and they're trying to do the right thing, right? The other dynamic that's important is that you don't need to, so I'm an introvert, right? I'm an INFJ, right? And I'm also not what I would call like alpha male. like a middle-aged white guy, but I'm not an alpha,
Mm.
I would say, either. And the reason I'm saying that is because a lot of people think that you do need to be these things. You need to be extroverted alpha
Yeah.
to be direct and straightforward, and it's not true. It's not true. And something like the radical candor model by Kim Scott really can help somebody see that. And the way to think about, I think the what my experience would tell me is that after teaching probably hundreds of people this model, is that, and Kim Scott probably owes me some money for this, but is teaching hundreds of people this model is that there's a difference between being like an amateur and a professional. This is the best way that I can see it. If you got these two, imagine like this impasse between an amateur and a professional, and the amateur's nice, people pleasing, getting by, but the professional is like kind and straightforward and can give you critical feedback and is actually good for you, right? Is actually wants to help you. In fact, both people want to help you, they just respond in different ways. And so the best way to think, this is why that radical candor is so good, the model's so great, because it gives a name to something that I think 80% of people are doing, which is that they've got this ruinous empathy. In
Hmm.
other words, they care so much. Like it'd be like between you and me, Hannah, like we're coming onto this podcast, for example, and I could see that you had food in your teeth from
Yeah.
lunch, for example. And I can see it. But because it's really awkward and difficult and embarrassing, I'm not going to say anything. So my high caring actually is ruinous. It stops from me looking after you. Whereas somebody that's radical candor would say, I think we should start again, Hannah. You've got some lettuce in your teeth.
Yeah.
That's it, right? It's like very straightforward. Just rip the band-aid off. But the high caring piece is so important. It's like, I know this is so important to you and we want to get it right. And if I was in your position, I would hope you would tell me the same thing, right? So the high caring piece is like, you believe in other people, you see their potential, you want them to do well, you don't want them to be embarrassed, and like I said, you would want somebody to tell you this information. But oftentimes it takes us to go over that impasse, right? We have to go from being nice to being kind, from amateur to professional, from friend, like I want to be people's friend, to being the business professional that we need to be. And but the thing is, you can be friendly in your
Hmm.
approach, but you don't. And this is back to needs to be liked and respected. It's the same thing, right? It's the same journey that we're making, and trying to get over. I think a lot of it is about getting over ourselves in a lot of ways. The way I interpreted it. Last thing here is the way I interpreted it for myself was recognizing that my inability to tell people exactly what I'm seeing and why it's a problem was really just everything was just taking longer. And because things take longer, the results come later. And because the results
Hmm.
come later, the whole coaching program, the value diminishes over time. And
Yeah.
people weren't getting where they want to go. So in order for me, in order for us to be more successful, my clients to get there faster and better, I had to get over myself to help them. And so for me, it's like, I can't sit back here and watch you make this mistake. And because I care so much about the work we're doing and the success we can have here, I've got to say what it might be difficult. You might not like me when I say it, but I've got to get over that because I care deeply about the work that we're doing. So that's the difference, right? It's like you can care deeply, but it somehow stops you from saying what needs to be said, or you can care deeply and it drives you towards saying what needs to be said. I think that's the difference. And it's the, like you said, the manipulative people in the world that actually sit back and watch somebody screw up because they win out of it somehow. We want to avoid those people as much as possible, right? This is I would say like 80% of the time, what I've just described is the journey that like 80% of the people, sorry, are trying to make. And
Yeah.
radical candor is a really great picture for us, to an illustration and how we can swing the pendulum towards a better place.
Yeah, it's like a compass when you're trying to respond to a potentially awkward situation to say, I how do I get through the situation? This is a compass that helps you navigate it.
Yeah, Yeah, it's like an example of this is like when you're working with a like if I was working with a client, for example, and I could see that they were doing something that was like diminishing their authority, for example. Like
Hmm.
we talk about this a lot, right? They're the way they turn up, the way they speak, their body language, whatever it could be. And I could say, like in a high caring way, I could just say, Hannah, look, I know it's really important for you to be seen and perceived as an expert. You are an expert, actually. You're really great at what you do. But you're doing this one thing right now that's diminishing your authority. And I worry that it's going to affect the way that your clients perceive you.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the high caring piece. And I'm going straight to the thing. It's not the same as the sandwich that people talk about, where it's like you've got to tell somebody something nice, then tell them the critical thing, and then finish with something nice. That's not radical candor. Radical candor is tell them why it matters so much and how much you care about the thing, and then go straight to the thing. That's the best way to deliver it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
Does that help?
phenomenal. I wanted to quickly talk about your book,
Oh yeah.
Become a Authoritative Coach. And by the way, I'm going to bring that in March when we see each other in Chicago. I hope you write a little note in it. So, I, as a coach, have read it multiple times and I get a ton out of it. But I really truly believe that anyone who is managing people, who is selling, who needs to be more effective in their communication, would get something out of this book.
Right. Agreed.
So, how could they use the book? What should they expect when they buy it in terms of what is the thing that they're going to be learning when they
Right.
read the book?
Well, okay, so you're right. The book's called Become an Authoritative Coach. So if you're a coach or consultant, the book's probably more title wise attractive to those. But I would say it's consultants and coaches, leaders and managers, and people who generally work with clients. So account managers, project managers, client leads and agencies, that sort of thing. All of those, that whole spectrum of people, that's who the book's really for. Where, generally speaking, where the stakes are high and you're some sort of like facilitator of
Mm,
discussion, conversation. So that could be everything from your one to one with your direct report to facilitating meeting internally at work, to facilitating client sessions, group sessions, delivering work. All of that stuff is all included in there. And so everything that's in the book is the stuff that I learned from doing all of that work that I've just explained there. But when you publish a book, you can't say this is for everybody. You have to publish a book and say this is who it's for, right? Otherwise, you don't sell it to anybody. So you have to pick a lane. But ultimately, there's a lot of life lessons in there. In fact, a lot of people, I would say, Hannah, comment on this is like, this isn't just a book for work, it's a book for life. So there's a lot of techniques in there that we can use with anybody that we're speaking to about anything. Um, so there's a bunch of mindset stuff in there. Like the way that I write it is about just changing your perception of how you're perceived or how you need to be perceived. So a big part of this is like so for example, if I turned up onto this podcast and I was like, oh, well, you could buy the book if you want to. It's not that important. Blah. If I was not confident about it, then people aren't going to listen to that, right? There's a part of this is about turning up in the right way in order
yeah.
to help your people that you're speaking to get the results that they're looking for. And so a lot of it comes from you and your presence and your mindset and how you turn up. This is what I was talking about, like being an introvert and not an alpha. There's a energy that needs to come from you to get people. Like, so if we were working together and you were my client, I know the number one thing is you need to do the work to get the results. And if I'm not the right person that helps bring out the potential in you, then you're not going to do it. And so there's a persona that needs to happen, like some sort of persona, heightened energy needs to come in there. And so it's mindset and attitude is the first place to start. So if you can't control the frame and you can't control the conversation and you can't lead and guide your client to or the person you're speaking with to where they need to go, then you're always going to struggle, I think, to influence people. And I'm right, fine line between influence and manipulate. Okay, we've talked about that already. But ultimately, it's about turning up in the right way to help
Hmm.
your clients to actually do what they need to do, right? Be the right person for them. So when you get into the book, it starts with the mindset. It's like, we've got to get your head right. You've got to think differently. You've got to feel a level of confidence, believe that you're good for people, believe that you know what you're doing, and that you don't just back down at the first bit of resistance or pushback that you get from people, right? That you can really push through that. And then I think, really, in a nutshell, you move from mindset into like really crafting a great relationship with the people you're working with. So there's some type of peer level relationship. And this can affect not just coaches and consultants with clients, especially if you're like, say, for example, you're a freelance coach, but you're working with a CEO of like a $30 million company. You might automatically think, I'm not their peer, but you can't think like
Yeah.
that, because you need to be at peer level for them to create the influence that you need in the organization. But the same is true of leaders. So oftentimes leaders, well, one of the biggest lessons in leadership is hiring people that are better than you at the thing that they do, right? And
Absolutely.
therefore you might think to yourself, well, I'm less than them. I'm supplicant to them. And that's not true. You're in a leadership position for a reason, because you hire people that are great at what they do, and you can get the best out of them. You can pull their, like, bring the potential out of them. You believe in them, right? So I think this happens in all different dynamics where there's a hierarchy or perceived hierarchy and things, is actually finding out how to create a peer level relationship with the people we're working with. And so I think the last thing that's important for anybody that wants to pick up the book is, like, there's 100 coaching questions in it. So for anybody that's having those types of conversations we've talked about, whatever your role is, it's very helpful to have a toolbox of phrases and go-to statements that you can make. Like, when should you ask a question like this? Whereas when would it be appropriate to make a statement like this? And the book helps to just different situational client situations where these questions really help to get to where you want to go. So it's all in the book, right? There's about, like I said, there's over 100 different questions in there. But I would say, like, by the time you get to the end of the book, you should be realizing that your need to be liked is holding you back from being the best communicator that you can be, or coach or leader or whatever. But not only that, it's not just about you. It's realizing that my need to be liked is actually hindering the ability for the people around me to actually succeed as well. And so
Yeah.
it's trying to get over that impasse from the need to be liked to become an empowering peer, not just for your own status and your own success, but ultimately realizing that if I continue down this path with this need to be liked and this people pleaser mindset, that my clients and the people around me are ultimately going to, they're going to be worse off because of it.
Fantastic. Awesome. So if someone wanted to reach out and work with you,
Mm-hmm.
in what capacity could they work with you?
Yeah, there's loads of things that we do together, but I think the first thing is, in the book we talk about it as like the work. This is like a constant work in progress. Reading the book is like step one, of many steps, and after that, it's about continual practice and implementation. So, the authoritative coach.co.uk is where I do my writing. I've got my podcast there. I've got a community of like leaders, coaches, consultants, and agencies in there. That would be the next best place to go to kind of step into my world a little bit more. And then from
Mhm.
there, there's just the different levels of services that I can offer, where I work with individuals or I work with teams, and I do that online, I do that in person, workshops, and lots of different activities, from role playing scenarios to people embedding a culture of great communication within organizations. And then I'm right down to the individual level, like with someone like you, Hannah, where I'm watching calls, I'm giving feedback, all of that stuff, and everything in between. So really, it's about recognizing that, first of all, when you read the book, hopefully what that'll do is shine a light on the fact that maybe you're not communicating at your highest potential. You have to get there first, right? A lot of people don't even realize there is an issue. As soon as you realize there's an issue, then it's time to get to work on fixing it.
Very good. So I'll drop the your contact details and the link to your Substack and your podcast
Mm,
and stuff
yeah,
into the show notes. So
cool.
they're definitely there. Where's the best place to reach out to you other than that? Is that
Well, yeah,
LinkedIn?
I think LinkedIn's good, but Instagram, I would say, is like more of a sandbox for me.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think that concludes our interview. I really truly truly appreciate it. There's so many great nuggets of wisdom, and I love it. And I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. It's great. Thanks for having me on, and all the best with this podcast. I hope people listen to it and get a lot from it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. As always, I will put all the links and contact details of our guest in the show notes. And if you have any questions or you would like to be on the show, please email me at hannah@3pcreativegroup.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn under Hannah Eisenberg at 3P Creative Group. I will speak to you soon.